What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Hidden Health Podcast. Today is a special day because, as you can see, we are here. If you're on YouTube, hashtag go to YouTube. We are here live in person with each other at my humble abode. We pulled out some plants to, set a vibe and to ignore Ruben's, mess behind it. So we create a good atmosphere here for you guys, and we are excited because this is going to be a huge benchmark in our podcast recordings.
Oh yeah.
We're switching some things around, as you will see when this podcast is released. Yeah, man, how you doing, Ruben? How's it like being in New York again?
It's nostalgic and interesting seeing New York in a COVID era. You know what I mean? Like stores closed, empty streets, no tourists. It's really, really interesting to see. And just everyone walking around with their mask on. It's like kind of like what you see in a movie. So
you went to Times Square, right?
I did. I have a video of it. Like I just did like a 360 video.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird. It was completely empty. It was like noon when I got there. So you would think it's like packed because people are on lunch break when they used to go to work, but there was nobody, zero. Like it was empty. All you saw was the cars just passing through. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. It's just weird to see. I mean, I enjoy it. I hated walking through there with all the traffic that of human traffic that was around there. But now you just walk on through. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Well, it's been good having you here. This is actually our last day with us before Ruben leaves. He's gonna go spend Thanksgiving with his family. We're actually recording this on Thanksgiving Day. Boy, do we have so much to be grateful for.
Oh yeah.
So this podcast can be a little different. What we noticed is that we never actually sat down and talked about how these two knuckleheads got together, and how we ended up here, how we ended up doing this podcast, why it's important to us, why we're still doing it, and sort of what our visions are for our lives and for this show moving forward. I think it'd be really exciting to just document sort of what journey we've been on coming to this point. Right. And you guys could, get to know a little bit more about the people you listen to on the show. And and we'll probably do this again in the future as we evolve and grow and all those things. 100%. But here's the first of many Ruben and Jessie epilogues, or whatever that word. Is that the right word?
I have no idea. But this is not a Spartan journal.
This is not a Spartan journal. This is a Jessie and Ruben journal, Ruben and Jessie journal. So let's begin, man. So why don't you tell the people how we first met?
Yeah, man. Coming to back from China, I'm gonna just go from my experience. I got a call from Dougie, a mutual friend of ours. Mm-hmm. So shout out to Dougie, who invited me to come to this emotional intelligence training. I said yes. A month later, I'm on a bus heading to Philadelphia. And that first day of doing this training, no one knew where they were staying. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Both of us. We just went without any plan. I was too broke to be like, let me just get a hotel. I was unemployed at the time. And you were with Mustafa, another mutual friend of ours. Shout out to Mustafa. And I was with Eddie, another mutual friend.
Shout out to Eddie.
And I remember being with Eddie, and we were sitting together, but obviously we kind of like went around. End of the night, no one can get in touch with Dougie, all of us. Mm-hmm. And he, funny enough, he invited all four of us. So Dougie was kind of that connector between us four. And we were in the lobby of this hotel / casino trying to figure out where the hell are we going to stay that night. Mm-hmm. And I had already accepted, and I already told Eddie, if I have to stay in this hotel lobby, that's what I have to do, right? Because I'm not paying for a hotel. I don't have a car. Yeah, the list goes on of things I don't have at that time. Y'all were also looking for the same thing, mm-hmm. You and Mustafa. And somehow we just bumped into each other in the entrance and we started just chatting. And one thing led to the next of being like, wait, you also know Dougie? I know Dougie. Oh yeah, he invited you? He invited me too. did he tell you where you were going to stay? It's like, yeah, he said at his house, but he's not answering his phone. And we were like, oh, what if we all split like a Motel 6 or something, a cheap hotel? And we connected. Mustafa had a car, so he was able to drive us out to the Motel 6. And all four of us stood in a 2-bedroom hotel for that weekend.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, like, you know, we barely knew each other, but we had to sleep together.
Yeah, because there were only 2 beds. So we basically, I mean, you slept with Eddie and I slept with Mustafa that first night or two. I think it'd be good because you already mentioned a few things. You were unemployed at the time. You had just come back from China. And also just a quick note, it was only until after we had gotten into the motel that we realized we all grew up in the same city.
Yep.
All 4 of us, we all grew up in the city. I think Eddie grew up in Jersey or Long Island, right? But we all grew up next to each other. And me and him, like he went to middle school a few blocks away from where I grew up with my parents. So really, really close, which was also another crazy thing because Dougie's not from New York.
No, he's from Philly.
So there was no real reason for that to happen other than coincidence. But back to the story. So why don't you tell the people, and then I'll go as well, kind of where you were at the time in your life, how old you were.
Right.
Because it's just hitting me now. That was 4 years ago, dude.
Yep, 26. I was 26.
Wow.
26 years old, had just turned 26. I think it was in February, so it's only been, I was still fresh back from China. So it's kind of like funny because you get culture shock going to China, but then living in China for that long and being in this completely different place and then coming back here, it's like you get hit with culture shock again because you're like, what? Like things aren't the same. I adapted to that. Now I have to readapt to my home. So I was still readapting and obviously trying to find a new job, trying to make money on the side, hustling. I learned photography, so I was trying to do that, and things were just not working at the time. So I was in a really dark place, you know, really, really dark place. And I've talked about that several times on the podcast, about that dark night of the soul year that I experienced. I'm still in that area. I was living with my sister at the time, who has her own challenges. And that was hard. So, you know, living with my sister, kind of taking this step backward, in a sense, that's what I felt like. I took the step backward, which is why going to this next level thing, I felt that it was just necessary, even though I didn't have the money for it. I just kind of figured it out to get the money. I didn't have the money for it, but I was like, I need to do something that kind of takes me out of the norm that I've been in for so many months.
Sure.
So I think that's what kind of, because I almost said no when Dougie called me. I was just like, and I think you did.
I said no multiple times.
You said no multiple times. But I almost said no, but because, you know, he just asked the right questions. Dougie is like really good at that. He asked the right questions for me. And at the time I was very vulnerable. So I think it just worked out, because now if I think that happened, I'll probably say no and be okay with it. Like be like, no, bro, I don't want to do this. But at the time it's something I needed based on like what he talked about, even though he didn't reveal much. So it sounded like a multi-level marketing scheme. But then, you know, I went on their website and I was just like, I guess this is just a training. They're not going to make me buy a membership or any stupid thing that those MLMs do. So I was just like, you know, I have nothing to lose. I was on my lowest point. I had nothing to lose. Why not just try this?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it was sort of similar for me. I mean, I'm obviously younger than you. I was 19 at the time, and the day. So Dougie had been calling me multiple times
so crazy.
To try to get me into this thing. And each time, you know, I had done an MLM in the past. And so the way he was talking to me about it, I was like, I've heard this before. I know what this means. And he's like, no, that's not what it is. And same thing, you know, when the day I said yes, basically what happened, I remember it very clearly. I was, at the time I was working, I had just gotten my first job in marketing. It wasn't even a job. It was like an internship. and I think I was getting paid like $800 a month. It was all right. It was whatever. 19. I didn't know shit about marketing. I got a job with a pretty well-known influencer in the fitness space, and very long days, lots of work, and I didn't know what the fuck I was doing with my life. Like it was kind of right after high school. I had done the MLM thing, and then once I got out of that, I went into this marketing thing with this guy, and I had just remembered, like, at the time I didn't like the way I was performing in all areas of my life, even at work. Like I was grateful for the opportunity, but I just remember like I knew inherently that I was sort of a lazy piece of shit, and and that I was just getting by, and work was reflecting that in many ways. And not just that, but like I had a really poor ability to speak up for myself and to hold my ground, and I was just so confused and so lost. And I remember at the time there was this big expo that was happening, and the rest of the team left, and I had to stay back to sort of take care of things, or just man the station. And I'm sitting in this, we were working out of an apartment, and I remember just sitting there and just being like, what the fuck? Like, I'm making $800. I'm not in, I quit college. I had these dreams of being this, like, multi-millionaire entrepreneur. And that was, obviously I was nowhere near that. And starting to realize how much harder it is to actually become successful watching, because we had a small team. And I remember watching what was going on, trying to make this business better. And I was like, wow, this is a lot of work that I have no sense of ability to manage or do. And I was constantly late. I was just bad. I was just shitty. And that was really starting to hit me. And then obviously, I didn't have all the friends I had in high school who were all gone. And I just felt sort of very alone and lonely at the time. And I remember this one night, I'm sitting in the office. Dougie gives me another call, and yeah, it was similar. He basically was just like, what if you were able to push past, who you are now? Like, like if you could be everything that you actually wanted to be, what could you accomplish? Whether this program did that or not, it was exactly what was calling for me, and so I said yes. And then and then the rest is sort of history on that front. That's when we all met up and this program together. And I think we should talk about the program a little bit, because I think it is sort of, especially the second one.
Oh, yeah.
But it definitely, I think, bonded us.
Right. I mean, that's what things like this do, because it's so, on an emotional level, it's very high on the benchmark of like emotions that you experience during these weekends, because they're weekend long kind of retreats in a sense. And the questions they ask, the exercises they do, when they're doing the exercises, they kind of link the music perfectly.
Yeah.
So you're like having this multi-sensory experience when you're going through these exercises. The yelling exercises that we've done, like all these things where, it brings out true emotions, whether that was anger, sadness, like you're releasing a lot of the stuff that we probably were holding on to.
And we had never done, at least for me, like I'd never done anything like that before. Since then I've done a lot of different shit that's similar, right? Not similar in what the training was, but similar in like self-exploration. But I had never done anything like that up until that point.
Same here. Like never had anyone tell me like, you're gonna scream at the top of your lungs, multiple times throughout the night. And you're just like, what, why? But then you do it and you're like, I see why, you know what I mean? So, and I can understand why when Dougie called, like after going through it, he's like, I can't tell you too much because it'll ruin your experience. And obviously at the time I was just like skeptical about that, but because I was where I was at, I was like, I'm open to anything right now. And that was the best thing that could have happened. Him not telling me anything about the program. He was just like, just know that you're going to come out of this different or like rediscovering who you are.
Mm-hmm.
So there was that rediscovery during that weekend, and there was multiple. So folks, if you don't get, it was like a 6-month long process with multiple weekends. I think every month was a different weekend, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. And then we did the last one, which was like 3 months long.
3 months long. Yeah, that's what I meant. Like discovery, it goes 3 levels: discovery, breakthrough, and then VIP. I think it stands for like vision, impact, something.
And purpose,
something like that. But I remember going through that first week, and I think because it was so emotional, I remember us going back. I think it was Saturday night after the Red-Black game, and us talking about like how our teams did and how we showed up during that time. And we were always up to like 2-3 a.m. talking about this, even though we had to be there on time for the program at 8:30 a.m.
Yeah.
So definitely lack of sleep. But I think that bond was created because we were going through these emotions. And when you go through something hard like that, it just brings people together.
Yeah.
It's hard. You're showing faces of yourself that you don't show to sometimes even your family.
Anyone.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I remember that was like every day. After the training, we would go back home, go back to the motel and just sit there and talk about like how all these things would apply to our lives.
Right.
And because we were all in such an open, vulnerable state, we kind of were already past the point of like, should I say this? Should I not say this? Like all our dirty laundry was on the table. And, we were all, at least me and you, similarly, we were at very low points in our lives. And so, we were just talking about everything that was going on.
Right.
And yeah, it was a trip. I remember especially after the second training was hardcore.
The second training is hardcore, but the best.
The best. But I remember multiple times. I think one of the beautiful things about that experience, where I think also bonded us, was it was the first time, like, even though we were putting our dirty laundry on the table, we also, I think, in Breakthrough had the ability to like acknowledge the other person too.
Right.
So that was at least the first time where like someone else, especially another man, was be like, hey, I noticed this positive thing in you.
Right.
And I think vice versa, like between the four of us, we were able to like positively reinforce the better parts of ourselves to each other.
Yeah.
And that was awesome for me.
Didn't we do that on the drive back home?
Yeah, I remember that drive.
I remember that drive. Yeah, that was very impactful.
Yeah. And so we went through these trainings together. And so then what started to happen, at least in your life, after coming out of these things? Because I know like where you are now is vastly different than where you were then. Oh, yeah. And not just career-wise or personality, but like, what can you talk a little bit about your relationship with Karina at the time and sort of the evolution that began to happen?
Yeah, I mean, we were in a bad place because being in a long distance relationship is no easy feat. If you are listening, you probably had that experience or not. If you do, at the same time, it's a great experience, no matter how dark it may get, no matter how close you can get to breaking up with somebody, or being like, is this the right move? Or should we be together? Yada, yada. These questions that begin to come up because there's no physical aspects to your relationship. Mm-hmm. So you're like, if I don't have that, like this camera thing, or, it's funny how we talking about that during the COVID era, but, like, is that a way we want to live? And that question came up a lot when we were together. And during that time, I was a very emotional person. Like I was just extremely emotional because it was just like all my armor had been shattered, like completely gone through this whole experience. Not the next level experience, but the experience of China and coming back home and trying to reconfigure my life to be like, I need some normalcy, which I didn't. I need some purpose, which I didn't have. And when a man loses that, as we talked about, like masculinity, when a man loses that, you just become more feminine. And if you're with a woman who's feminine, she may not like that. She's like, I need a leader. I need someone who can have purpose, who can help us move forward. And that wasn't there. So I think Karina started to pull back from that because she was just like, I don't want to be with a guy who's like me in a sense, right? If you look at it from an archetype standpoint and psychologically and energetically, I was pushing her away by being that vulnerable, like cried all the time. I wanted to spend time with her like all the time because I had nothing else to do, but she was still in college. She was trying to figure out her life. And she's like, you should have that figured out already, bro, in a sense, right? Like in terms of energy and what we know now, you should have that figured out. And I didn't. So like, I had to kind of work through that and like tell her like, this is just temporary, because she didn't understand. She's also 5 years younger than me as well. So she didn't understand the fact that these things happen, these are temporary, and they will happen again. And if we can't figure this out now, what makes you think you can figure it out later? So if we can hunker down and work through this together, it will be much easier when these hard times come later on. Like when we have a kid, that's going to be a tough time. Everyone says it. So how do you prepare for that? When you retire, that's a hard time, right? Like, or God forbid anything bad happens to one of us, like that's a really hard time. How do you deal with those moments? And there's a lot of stories out there of couples who have gone through this. So it's like one of those things. Yes, it wasn't as bad as like physically being injured or something bad happening in that sense, but in an emotional level, that's what I felt. I was injured emotionally. I was like in a really bad injury and I was recovering from that injury emotionally. So as much as she tried to help, she was like, I don't have the strength at this moment. I think she does now, but at that time in our life, she didn't have the strength to hold us both up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think obviously she's grown a lot since then, but I always kind of like had the strength to hold us both when she had her hard times, right? You know, going through college, it's not an easy feat as well. Like going to school and having to do that and trying to figure out what you're going to do after. That's a really hard time to be in terms of like, who am I in a sense that really comes up. And we were kind of going through that at the same time. So when you're going through that at the same time, it's hard to do it together. You kind of need to separate individually to figure it out and then come back together. That's kind of what happened in a sense with our relationship. We barely saw each other during that time. You know, she was still going to college in Stony Brook, which is 2 hours away on train from New York. And we just kind of like stopped seeing each other as often to work on those things.
And what was that work for you? Like at the time, what did you start doing?
Well, for me, it was, doing Next Level and doing a lot of those exercises and, you know, jumping back into reading different kinds of books. So that's when I really stopped self-help in a sense, like stop the bullshit self-help book. You know, Mark Manson talks about this. I won't get into it, but like stop the bullshit self-help about positivity and all that stuff. I was like, life isn't always like this. I realized that during that time. I was like, but how can I get to a place? And it wasn't until I read The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, that book, where he's just like, you have to figure out like how to have a life that you can maintain, right? Whether it's down or up, like, you know that you are going to be okay. So that's when I got into like philosophy, psychology, how the brain works and all those things. And that really helped. And then like, obviously we got into photography, and that was kind of like my way of showing my emotions, or like bleeding it out in a sense, by taking photos. I used to walk around the city all the time and just take pictures of random people, and just, there was emotions in these photos. And then just like learning that craft, it gave me something to do. It gave me something that had purpose. And even when I got my job, I finally got a job, like after Breakthrough, I think was when I finally got a job. So I was like, okay, I'm able to make some money. And then there was some photography projects that I got money for, and that actually Next Level people asked for, which was funny. So I did that, and it really helped like start. I felt like it was coming back. Like I was coming back. That injury was being healed. And the darkness, which still existed in me, wasn't as scary. Like I was able to look that darkness in the face and be like, I'm not scared of you anymore. Like I've grown much better. Then I was able to like reel Karina back in in a sense of be like, hey, I'm okay. But now you're, at the same time that I was becoming better, she had just graduated college and she was going through her own challenges with like, oh, now I got to find a job, but I don't know how this work thing works. The school doesn't teach me how to do a resume and this and that and this and that. So luckily I was able to support her there, but I was able to be like, I got us. Like, I'm okay. I'm okay, as okay as I can be, because I still had to deal with like debt that I accumulated during that time, which financially was really a big struggle for me. But I was able to emotionally heal and just be like, okay, now I got to do the work. Like that's when the work came in. And then, a few months later, I got my job, my other job that paid much better. So I was able to pay more things. Then I was able to move out of my aunt's house I was living in at the time, and things started to.
You were living in the basement, right?
I was living in the basement of my aunt's house.
During the lowest part of your...
The lowest part of my life. It's so funny how that works. I was living under the ground.
Yeah.
In a really dark basement because she didn't really have lights down there. Just one little light that you would put on that would barely like illuminate the whole basement. So it was kind of funny how that worked. And all the storage was there. So it was like storage on one side, baggage. A random bed. Yeah, baggage. So a random bed in the middle, and all my shit was under the bed. So literally my whole livelihood, because I didn't leave anything. My whole livelihood was in two travel bags, one big, one small, under the bed, with a big ass black laundry bag next to my bed where I would, my dirty laundry. And then we had a kitchen table. They had a kitchen table down there for some whatever reason that would have my laptop and stuff, and I would work in. But yeah, like all surrounded by storage. I heard everything upstairs, so my sleep was horrendous because my cousin had 2 kids, 2 babies, who would run around, not go to sleep till like 2 a.m.
Yeah, I remember we used to talk on the phone. And you were just like, bro, I gotta get the fuck out of here.
Yeah, I love Mom to death. I mean, she provided shelter for me during those months. I didn't pay rent or anything, so thank God, So I'm forever grateful for that. But it was definitely tough to live in a house with 2 babies. Like one was I think 3, the other one was 5. In those ages they don't listen to anything. They're running around, but it's just like my inner life was showing in my outer life.
100%.
Right. And I was thankful that I had my aunt who's so loving, who would take care of me. She always made me dinner, and so I would come home to something. So I had some sense of normalcy where I was just like, oh, I'm calm, and she's like, dinner is ready for you, and had a plate ready for me. So that for some reason, like I always come home and like be expecting that, and there'd be that my little bliss for the day, because it was like so much darkness throughout the day, and that was like my little bit of light that I can just hang on to, just this woman coming and just giving me food, right? Like you sometimes just need that, and we need to like, come and like be like, okay, I'm in a safe place. I'm in a safe place and I'm okay. Because, I had my anxiety was through the roof. So that was the only time I was able to like really be like, I'm happy, and talk to my aunt, even though she only talks Spanish and I don't talk Spanish. We would communicate somehow. I don't know how. But yeah, you kind of needed that.
Yeah.
So it was tough, man. It was a tough time. And I'm grateful that I was able to move past, and, all thanks to all the interesting ways the universe just throws things your way, and if you say yes, things open up for you. You know what I mean? It was like one of those lessons, and I was like, I can never be a atheist, those people that don't believe in the higher power. So I'm like, bro, like I wasn't doing anything. The call just came to me. All I had to do was say yes to the call, and boom, and here we are today. If it wasn't for me saying yes to that call, where else would have I been? And I always think of that. I'm always like, when I die, can I like reverse and see what would have happened?
Like in video games, we have like different options.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah. But what about you? Like what?
Yeah, I mean, so when Next Level, at least the first 2, because the last one was sort of lingering because it was like a 3-month-long program.
Oh yeah.
But at least after the first 2, it's hard to remember sometimes, because like you evolve so slowly over time, you sort of forget where you were at certain stages. But if I was to look back and sort of pinpoint, I think the biggest thing coming out of the second program was I had sort of there were two really sort of main things that happened. One was I let go of a lot of sort of inner anger and inner bullshit. Like the two biggest things that I remember of that time was I had felt a lot of guilt for my previous relationship because we started dating. I started dating this girl when I was 15 and we dated until about 17. And no one in high school teaches you how to be in relationships. So, um, you know, yeah, she was my really good friend before we started dating. And then we started dating, and then about a year and a half in, I knew that we were just becoming different people at the time. And I was too afraid to break up. I was too afraid to end that form of the relationship, because like I said, we were really good friends, but like I didn't know the language or the perspective on like, oh, there's different ways you can approach this. I had no idea, I had huge jealousy issues as well. And I sort of just ran with whatever programming I had when it came to relationships. And so the last 6 months, we were just fighting a lot and yelling at each other a lot, really aggressively, and saying things that were not kind and mean. And when I did end that relationship, it was really shitty. And I just didn't know how to navigate that at all. And so it was really after her was when I started becoming more and more interested in communication. And one of the backlashes of personal development, I guess, especially at a young age, is you only have very few reference points, right?
Right.
So everything I was learning, I was just referencing it only to that relationship because that was my only one. And the realizations were just stacking guilt because I started to take more and more responsibility for my part in the relationship and just saw how, how in what ways I was not productive in it. And so I remember for a long time, I had a really sort of aversion to getting into any relationships at all, developing any sort of emotional bond with women again. I was only interested in really sleeping with them, or just having like flings, but not like really developing anything. And I remember that was the main thing in the first training was sort of letting go of a lot of that guilt and shame around how I was, and just really forgiving myself and being able to move forward. The second training was really intense for me. I still remember there was this moment, and very few things have been this way since. Maybe one thing which I'll bring up in a bit, but I remember like that that training was so intense for me that I had never up until that point ever felt emotional exhaustion.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
I remember seeing you, and I think it was Saturday night. You were just like done.
I was done because it ripped through my soul. There was a lot of stuff that happened to me as a child, specifically like physical and verbal abuse from those in my family. Especially my brother. And caveat, like me and my brother have a wonderful relationship. It was to the point that I didn't even know that any of that was affecting me. And how I showed up in the world up until that training. And one of the biggest things I realized was that I had been so sort of beaten down by the school system and my relationship with my family and the verbal and physical abuse I experienced as a child that although I put off like a very positive demeanor, I was actually really scared of life. I was really scared to take chances. I mean, I took chances because that's my inclination, but I was really scared to take real chances and to, try and to sort of commit to things.
Yeah, that's why our stretch was our stretch.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we could talk about that too. And that definitely bonded us.
Oh yeah.
If anything, for those who don't know, so in one of the trainings, you do what's called stretch night, and stretch night is basically a night where
Do one of the most uncomfortable things you will probably do in your life.
Yeah, you do it. Basically, the instructor, based on who you are as a person,
how you've been showing up,
will put you in a category where you have to do a performance based on those things that scare you. And what our instructor, the amazing Chris Lee, found within us was our lack of commitment to life. So what did we have to do?
Chippendales.
Yeah, we had to be Chippendales. If you don't know what Chippendales is,
Google it.
And you will see. Basically, Ruben and I
we were doing Magic Mike.
We were doing Magic Mike in women's underwear.
Yes.
It was absolutely terrifying in front of like 100+ people. And
to Prince's song Cream.
Yes. Oh man, we should play that song again. That's a really good song. Yeah. So that was intense, and that was definitely made us commit hardcore to showing up and showing ourselves.
Oh yeah.
And so that was a real issue in my life because of all the sort of negative feedback I had from teachers and just constant feeling that I wasn't going to be anything. Even though I knew internally I could be and I wanted to be, I was really afraid to take action and to commit and trust myself in the process. And so what ensued after Next Level was I started to, I was jumping sort of around from jobs. I had, soon after Next Level, I left that job, that internship, because it just wasn't healthy for me anymore. And I started working at a different place. And then pretty soon after that, I got fired from that job.
VIP.
Yeah, I got fired from that job. And my buddy, who I mentioned earlier, Mustafa, me and him decided to start our own marketing, social media agency. And that became the focus. And my focus at the time was, I'm going to become a millionaire. Like, I'm going to become the most successful business person I know. I'm going to crush it. I really started listening to guys like Tai Lopez and started reading like Dale Carnegie and what's that? How to Think and Grow Rich, like all those, classic personal development books. Those were the books I started to read. And I was just like, I'm going to be rich and I'm going to be huge and I'm going to be popular and I'm going to have nice cars and all those things, right? That was my focus.
Yeah, I lost it.
Yes. Thank you, Ruben. And
sorry, I know your life. I know your whole life.
I know, bro. And then, so basically then what happened was it's pretty crazy how it happened because to give some context, my brother has PTSD. And so at the time he was trying all sorts of different methods to heal himself and support himself. And I remember there was this moment where, and I was still living at my parents' house at the time. I remember there was this moment where my mother was having I think really bad back pain. Her back was just hurting her for some reason. I think she was having headaches as well, or she just wasn't feeling good. And my father was known to have he was a physical therapist, but he also did energy work to some degree. And he would always sort of, help my mom out in those situations, but he was just working a lot. He was tired and he was just not interested. And I think at the time he was doing Uber. So, long rides, he wasn't really doing physical therapy anymore. And so he wasn't around as much to help my mom, but I was. And so I remember being why don't I try to do one of Pop's things? And then she's like, ask him. And I remember asking him and he was like, I'm not going to teach you shit, but here, look at this book. And I think it was called Shaman Healer Sage. That's the name of the book. I forgot the author.
Alberto
Vallaldo,
something like that.
I think it's Alberto Vallaldo. And I remember picking up this book and I started reading it. And he basically, so in the book, he never mentions this thing called ayahuasca. What he talks about is him having this, he was a psychologist or neuroscientist in America. And he went to go study with these people called shamans in the Amazon, and he was talking about all these sort of mystical experiences that were happening, where these shamans were like transforming into different figures, or they were using certain medicines or certain things to help heal people's trauma and issues. And a lot of what I was reading was somewhat similar to what my brother was exploring at the time, and or some of the things he was dealing with. And I remember Googling, I was like, shaman retreats in Peru. And then I click on one thing and it says this word, which if you've never heard it before, and you're just reading it, you're like, I don't even know how to pronounce this thing, right? It's a bunch of letters that you never really see mixed together. And it's spelled ayahuasca. And I don't even remember how I said it at the time. It was weird. And I remember reading it, and I didn't really know what it was, but I remember approaching my brother about it, and I was like, hey man, would you want to try something like this? And he almost immediately was like, yeah, let's do it. And so basically, we took a trip. We took a trip to Peru. We went to Cusco. And this was like so fucking strange. Like, it was out of nowhere. The only reason I came, I wasn't even gonna take it. I was just coming to like be supportive to my brother and just make sure everything was all right. And yeah, we were in this like sort of far away from home place. Cusco looks nothing like America. We had to take 2 planes to get there. It was a 7-hour trip. And then when we landed in Cusco, I remember we had to go to this, we got picked up at the airport, and we had to go into this shop in the middle of town. And that's where sort of we got picked up and driven out into way out into the mountains in the middle of nowhere. And there was this, that was a sanctuary where we stayed, and things happened. And so we were there for 8 days. And then my brother had like 4 ceremonies. For those of you who don't know, ayahuasca is a psychedelic drink. It's a mix of 2 plants, or 2 or 3 plants from the Amazon that get distilled down into this potion, and you drink it, and it's a hallucinogenic and takes you to different dimensions. And we've talked about this before on the podcast.
Right.
And I remember like on day 6, the whole time they were like, you have to take it. And I was like, I can't pay for it. They're like, it's fine, we'll make you work for it. And so I remember I was like cleaning one of the pools. I had to go do some work for them out in the city. And I was just helping them out. And then they gave me like a private session with one of the shamans. I won't go into the entire experience because it's a really long podcast, but it was very intense. There was a point where I legitimately thought it was the end of my life, and that I was not going to be on this planet anymore. My ego sort of exploded at one point. I didn't feel like I was part of anything. I felt, there was no difference between me or Ruben or the computer or anything. I was all the same. And the biggest thing that happened after feeling like that it was the end of my life was I just heard that the medicine say to me, America is sick. It's very unhealthy. You yourself are very unhealthy for the same reasons that America is unhealthy. And you are to help America get healthy, but first you must get yourself healthy. And it just showed me all the ways in my life that I was hurting myself, interested in the wrong things. I was way overweight at the time. I still have the image, like when I came back with my beard of where I was at. And it just said that your focus now is to move forward and get healthy. And so when I came out of that and came back to New York, like that was the most important thing for me. But I remember that first month when I came back, I didn't do anything. Like I had,
hungover, right?
I was hungover. I mean, it was such a shock to the system that I just remember staying indoors. Like I just stayed in my house, in my parents' house, for like a month, and um, I didn't watch really any TV or read any books or do anything. I was just sort of in my own little world. I remember spending many days just laying on the ground looking at the ceiling because it was just such a shock to the system. And uh, and then I remember at the time that's when you started your podcast. You started that Ruben. It was like emotional, like relationships. Like
yeah,
Ruben.
I forgot the name of it.
Yeah, you started your relationship podcast. I remember you telling me you wanted to do that. You got your little mic.
Yep.
And you were like, I'm gonna start doing a podcast. And I wasn't even listening to podcasts at the time, like not as much as I do now.
Nope.
I think maybe I heard like one. Maybe Lewis Howes. I remember watching like Lewis Howes videos. That was probably the biggest thing. Was Lewis Howes had his podcast on YouTube, and that's probably what I watched the most of. But podcasts really weren't in my ecosystem at the time. But I know you were like, I'm gonna start doing this thing, and it was shortly after that. That's when you brought me on to your podcast to talk about my experience. Do you remember that at all?
I do remember that. I still have the picture.
Yeah.
Of us on my couch.
Yeah. You want to talk about that a little bit when I came over? Because I know I was saying a lot of things.
Yeah, you were. I mean, at the time, obviously, me and Karina had moved in together. I started the podcast, and I was working my job and whatever. And you came back, and you just came over one day, and I remember seeing the beard, and I was just like, "Bro, you look completely different." Like there was Jessie before, and then Jessie after. You were just a completely different person, and you were telling us about your experience, and it was like mind blowing about the stuff. It's funny how these things work because then your brain starts picking up other things. That's when I first started listening to Aubrey Marcus's podcast. And he started talking about, he talks a lot about psychedelics and those experiences. I was just like, that's something here. So I was like, bro, you should come on. I think the podcast is out there somewhere. I just gotta get the title. Yeah. I don't remember it. It's probably on SoundCloud. But I remember bringing you on, and it was like, just hearing it, and obviously it got me interested in trying it. And we had a podcast on like that experience of doing psilocybin. But it was like, this is like a new world that we're like stepping into in terms of like what's next for us. So many things happened between that. I don't know if you remember, like besides you starting a social media agency after you came back from ayahuasca, you stopped that. And then you jumped in and started working with energy.
What do you remind me?
I don't know. You met this guy. I think you got the job at the assemblage.
That was way later though. That was like when I was already a year into assemblage.
Oh, you were already a year in?
Yeah.
But I think you came back. We did the podcast. You ended up going to the assemblage, and you were meeting all these amazing people.
But did I visit you when I was already working at the assemblage? Because I think I still had my beard.
And you still had your beard. Yeah. And then you found the job probably like a few months after.
Yeah. So I remember, so it was about, I remember hearing, this is another one of those crazy things. So when I was on ayahuasca, I remember hearing, you're going to grow your beard for 2 months. It's like, you're going to grow your beard for 2 months. So,
and be vegan.
And I was vegan for 9 months after that too. But I remember hearing that you were going to grow your beard for 2 months. And also this is where a big distinction happened in my life, because at the time prior to ayahuasca, I was really focused on, like I said, personal development, but from the perspective of like, make more money, become more efficient, in your communication, so you can win friends and influence people, so you can be successful, yada, 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 yada. But after ayahuasca, it was a huge distinction where it was like, that stuff is straight up surface level shit, which, up like almost a year ago, I started to change my mindset about that too. But at the time it was like, no, I got to focus on my heart. I got to focus on evolving spiritually. I got to go deeper. I got to get into meditation and energy work and all this stuff. That's where it just exploded for me. And yes, I was vegan at the time, and I was preaching veganism at the time too, which I laugh at now.
Change restaurants because like, they don't have vegan stuff here. We have to go here. You remember?
Yes. That was an interesting place in my life. And I remember, so I said, you're going to grow your beard for 2 months. And I remember for that first month, I was just at my parents' house. I wasn't doing anything. And then that second month was like, all right, I got to get a job. I got to start working. I got to make some money, And I remember I was applying for different jobs. I was having different interviews at the time, and I wasn't getting shit. And I remember I had this one interview at this one new place called the Assemblage. I had my beard, and that's the thing. Like when you think about going into interviews, like I didn't have a good beard. I had a really nasty looking beard. But I was just like, I got to keep this for 2 months. Ayahuasca told me to do it, so I'm just going to do it. And they took that interview. I spoke to them, and it was such a trip because the guy who started Assemblage did ayahuasca, which like I never heard of before I did it. And now the place I'm starting to work, the guy did ayahuasca, right? It's like, what the hell is going on? The place was really trippy. It was really cool. It had a lot of similar symbolism and quilts that they had in Peru when I did it. I just knew I was going to get the job. I had went there actually to see Aubrey Marcus. Yep. That's how I found out about the place. I went to see Aubrey Marcus, tell his, and that's also a trip. So basically what happened was I heard about Onnit. When I discovered Onnit, I was like, who founded this company? The next day I heard about Aubrey Marcus. I followed Aubrey Marcus on Instagram. The next day he was like, hey, I'm going to be in New York doing a talk at this thing. I was like, cool, let me go check. It was free. So I was like, all right, let me go see it. The next day I get there and I go to this place and I look around and I'm like, I'm going to work here. I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I'm going to start working here. And well, funny enough, the girl at the front desk was a girl I knew from high school. She was in the theater program, but just a year older than me. And so we connected and I was like, hey, like, are they hiring here? And then she was like, I think so. She gave me a card. I called, I emailed, got an interview, and they were like, yeah, you're hired. And the day before I started my job was the last day of my beard.
Oh, shit.
And so I shaved right before I started this new job. So it was all just like coincided in this really serendipitous way. And I just knew I had to be there because that place was all about, it had its weird things, but it was all about health, spirituality, wellness, well-being. And that's when I started to just flourish in that environment with those things. And that was when, I had been there for maybe a year and I started connecting with all these dope people. I had brought Ruben by. And I just remember at the time too, like Ruben was growing a lot in his own way. He moved out, which was huge. I didn't know anyone who lived out, outside of their parents' home at the time. He moved out, he was living with his girlfriend. He was growing in his job. He was doing his thing. He was working in the city, which was awesome. And then I remember there was just a point where I think you were still doing your podcast thing, but I brought you around and I was just, hey man, like there's a bunch of dope fucking people here. Why don't we start a podcast? Like, why don't we start together? Why don't we start interviewing these people? Because they're all talking about the shit we're interested in and it could be a good time. And we're like, I'm down. And I remember going to Best Buy. We got this fucking mic. We found this one room that was you had to pay for it at the Assemblage, but I worked there, so I was able to get it for us for free. And we just started podcasting. And I remember for me, it was after that podcast with Daniel Roth that I was like, we're doing something good here.
That's like episode 6, if y'all interested.
Yeah, I remember after that episode, that's where I was like, I mean, it was fun doing in the first place. I remember our first interview, I was so nervous. I was like, I don't know what the fuck.
You were like, we need to get her kombucha. You asked her, you need to get her kombucha. You need to get her a drink. We need to like make sure she's comfortable. Like, it was so funny.
Yeah, it was Marissa. That was our first interview.
Which is another great episode.
Yeah, and I just remember being like so nervous and didn't know what the fuck we were doing. And then we just started doing it.
Every single Saturday.
Every single Saturday, it was just became a thing. And yeah, and then after I think that episode with Daniel, that's when I was like, yo, we got something here. Like this is fucking dope. And I called it the Hidden Health Podcast because we saw within ourselves that health was so much more than like
just nutrition and fitness.
Yeah, nutrition and fitness and being jacked and all those things. Like there's so much more to someone's journey that isn't pretty and is hard and gut wrenching and different avenues people can take to get there. So that was our initial intention when we started the show. And that's basically what it was for 2018 to 2019. We're obviously growing in our own ways and developing, soon after I joined the assemblage, I had met my girlfriend, my now girlfriend, Valentina. I was still living with my parents at the time. And it was so funny because I didn't even recognize, like, I was so in it that I didn't realize what happened, but I was making, for my age and for the time, I was making considerably okay money. And I remember this, one of my coworkers saying to me, they were like, you can move out of your parents' house now, right? And I was like, oh shit, I can't. But that was such a, like, I didn't even think about it, And I was traveling about an hour and a half every day from work to home because I lived in Brooklyn. My job was in the city. And then I remember once, and after ayahuasca, like my sense of me being who I am, it wasn't absolutely clear, but it became so detached from my family. Like I was so ready to just explore myself so much farther and so much deeper that I started to find myself really becoming disconnected from my family at the time. And so I had already started feeling like I got to go somewhere. And I remember even there was this girl who I worked with who we were actually going to move in together. She was getting a place in like Far Rockaway, and I was planning on moving in with her in a few months. But I had met my girlfriend a few months before that. We started dating, and then I had this sort of huge sort of blowout session. I still remember it was on the roof at assemblage. I started breaking down because I just knew I couldn't be with my family anymore. I just knew that like what was going on there was so toxic, and I was so codependent with them, and it was terrible. And I was like, the only option I have is to move out. And that became like, I moved in with my girlfriend, but that was, I would say all of 2019, like 2020 is actually not the hardest year for me. Right. Like 2019 was the hardest year for me up to this point because there was so much rapid growth and change in my life. And I had to learn so many things I never knew about, taking care of yourself and being on your own. And I was still fucking up in a lot of different ways. And now I'm having this really intense, me and Valentina were only dating for about a month and a half before we moved in together. And I hadn't been in a relationship since I was 17. And now I'm 20, 3 years later, and in a intimate, raw, real relationship with this job, with all this drama at home. And it was fucking crazy, bro. And fortunately, I had a guy in my life who experienced a lot of this already, who went through this, and I was able to, connect with him and just, I was able to connect with you about all the things that were happening. Because you had already moved out, you had already been in a long relationship with someone and had your trials of fire. You had already had your experiences separating from your family. So, I had, at the time, I was really for a while leaning on you to, just give me perspective on like what the fuck is happening in my life,
That's so interesting. Something I wanted to comment on was the idea of like leaving the family because it's, like I did it, then you did it, and like it's funny how we both kind of had that experience. It's just like, it was like out of a place of kind of anger and sadness at the same time. Because it's just like, I don't connect with you anymore. I love you to death. And that's the hardest thing. It's like, I love you to death. You're going to be here for my entire life. And at the same time, I need to leave. So it's this idea of like, you know, it's part of the hero's journey where the hero has to disconnect. Or like, I had a friend say it beautifully once. He was like, it's like you're cutting the umbilical cord. It's tough. It probably hurts, but you have to do it. And you have to do it to separate yourself and start getting your own nutrition, right? Because you're getting the nutrition from your family in a sense, right? The umbilical cord. So what happens when you get your own nutrition? It's like, oh, I need to go. Oh, I need to do this now. Oh, I need to do that. Oh, I need to figure out how to breathe on my own. I got to figure out how to do all this on my own, just like a baby. And the fact that, you know, you do that, you remove yourself from the family and you're able to see things in a better, your perspective is better. Like it hurts.
Yeah.
And there's this hard, like, way to get used to it, because then you're like, oh, I gotta cook now, oh, I gotta do laundry now, especially if you had a mom who did it all for you like I did. But you have to like figure all these things out, and it's beautiful because you get to experience those things and just be like in this space as men should be. And we talk about this in masculine, and being masculine is like you're living on your edge for a while, and you're just like, I don't know what's happening. You're probably still calling your mom and being like, I need help. I need help with this. I need help with that. I know I did that. But this idea, and you know, it's just sharing this with the crowd. Like, you don't have to be, I want to say this to them, like, you don't have to be the person that has to fix your family. And I think that's a big thing we got going back to next level. I don't know about you, but I know that's a big thing I had, because trying to like get my mom to do next level, or get my sister to do next level, or get my father to do the next level, or like trying to bring these other people in who are just not in the same world as me, who are not seeing the perspective that I'm seeing. So through that, I was able to learn, I'm sure you can relate to this, is like, I was able to learn, like, I have to be an example first. And if they want to follow, cool. If they don't want to follow, that's also okay. And learning that. But I think, you know, you were just saying like how I've done all this, so you were able to lean on me. I think that's a great way of doing it. I really didn't tell you to do anything, right? I was just doing it as like just living my life. And I was setting an example to a certain extent, whether that's you or any of our other friends, and being like, yeah, I'm the oldest part of our group. But I, you know, and I don't take that lightly. Like I make sure that I'm always on top of my shit, because I feel like over the years, I've started learning, like, you feel like no one's watching, but actually everyone's watching.
Everyone's watching, yeah.
You know, especially with social media and all these things. Like, you may feel like no one's watching, but people are low key. They may not like your posts. They may not like a comment or send you DMs or any of this, but they're watching. I mean, look at the podcast. We have, you know, 1,000 downloads a month, close to that. And people don't communicate with us, but they're listening. So you're like, oh, people are watching. Right. And it's just this constant back and forth that I think I personally struggle with, which is like, oh, no one's watching. Why am I doing this? It comes up every now and then. I'm like, what are you talking about? People are watching. Like, you know, your closest friends and your family members are watching. You know, they're watching what you do. And I think that's good. It's good because it keeps that flame alive, being like, oh, when I make a decision to do something, now I'm no longer thinking about me. I'm thinking about everyone else, which is something that I got from the mushrooms. Like, you know, you do it first, but you also got to remember that other people are going to be, you know, in a sense behind you, being like, oh, you went through that obstacle already. Can you show me how to do that? It's like, how did you do that? And then you can say like, oh, I did this and this and this. Yeah. And then they can take their own route that way, but and avoid the traps that may come up during that experience. So it's big when you think about like, you just living your life, and this can go for anyone, right? Like, you just living your life, you're being an example to all these other people.
Yeah. And I remember, and so this is where I think things started, you know, when we start talking about, well, what is this podcast today? Why are we switching it? Why are we changing the name?
Which we haven't said. So spoiler alert.
Yes, we're changing the name of the podcast. Once you see this, it will be changed. It's called the Ruben and Jessie podcast.
That's it.
Keeping it simple.
Keeping it simple.
Why are we moving away from head and health? And sort of what our intentions are moving forward. I mean, you know, I'd love to hear your perspective, but I'll start because this is very fresh in my mind. Was, you know, one of the things that I started to. So I had moved to San Diego, and that's when, you know, if you go back, we actually, both of us moved to California at pretty much the same time, a month apart. And the reason I was moving out there was because I had gotten an opportunity to work for a different company, and I was starting to get really sort of restless at assemblage. It wasn't, you know, I think I had gotten everything I needed to get there from a learning perspective. I mean, I'm gonna miss that place. It was a beautiful place. I met my girlfriend there. We started a podcast there. Like, there's a lot about that place that
so many gifts.
Yeah, so many gifts from that space. My current job is because of that place. Like, where I work now is because I met someone there who then connected me to my boss now, Pam. So deeply connected to assemblage. But I was sort of, my soul was calling for something else, and I had connected with Paul Chek and the Chek Institute, and I had started interning for them, and then ultimately they gave me a job, and they ultimately were like, hey, you got to move out to, if you want to continue working here, you got to move out to San Diego. And I always had dreams about living in California at some point in my life. And so, you know, that's when I moved there. And when I moved there, you know, there's all sorts of things that I learned, but what's important for you to hear now in relation to what we're doing here moving forward and how this relates to COVID and all this stuff was one of the biggest things that I learned when I was out there was that there's different forms of spiritual growth. Well, so there's a few things. There's different forms of spiritual growth, because that's when I read David Goggins. That's when I read his book,
Can't Hurt Me, Baby.
Can't Hurt Me. And I read it and I read it and I read it. And what I learned was a lot of what I was interested in after ayahuasca and after Summit was like the energy work, the healing, getting in touch with your feminine side, you know, all those things. And that was ruining me at a point. That started to ruin who I was as a man, who I was as a person. And it was making me soft, and it was making me, you know, that wasn't really showing up in my career as much. Like I had learned a sense of responsibility and how to get shit done there. But outside of work, my life was in shambles. Like, I just didn't know how to manage my emotions at all. I didn't know how to just be tough, but not like be tough in the sense of just deal with shit or just get through things, even though they were hard. I had no resemblance of that. And so that was the first thing. Then the second thing that I realized was like, no man is an island, because I took everyone in my life in New York for granted. And I was craving this sense of alone time and craving the sense of like this idea of being a lone wolf, that I didn't need anybody and I could kind of just do my own thing. Then I quickly realized, but then I quickly realized like that's not possible. So the two biggest things that had, you know, and we had stopped doing the podcast at the time. Once we moved to California,
we were on hiatus.
We were on a hiatus. We were just doing our things, you know, figuring out our new lives. And I remember when I decided to move back to New York, which was 2 weeks before the COVID shutdown, funny enough.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was 2 weeks before that. The biggest things I realized was that it's funny enough. So it's so funny. The biggest thing I realized was I have to build community. I have to build community in my life. I have to come back with a sense of deep appreciation for my loved ones, and to be allowing and welcoming. Because I definitely at the time I was, you know, and this is something I still struggle with, especially if it's a loved one, but even more back then, was being extremely judgmental of people's processes, of telling people how they should and shouldn't live, and not to the point where I was just like it was. I would mainly do it with people I loved or cared for, and for those who I didn't, I just judged them silently, and for those who I did, I would just rip it into them constantly, and tell them how they should live and why they're wrong about this and wrong about that. Right. But that experience when I was in San Diego was like, hey, if you don't have certain tools or certain people in your life or support systems in your life, you're going to fall into shit just like them, you know, and you have no idea what's going on in their lives. You have no idea who's there, who's not there, what experiences impacted them for them to be the way they are. And it was just basically, I just grew a huge sense of compassion for others. Um, and understood within my, and it humbled the fuck out of me, because I was like, hey man, like, you're just as much of a piece of shit as you think these people are, because look at how you're performing in life.
That mirror.
Yeah, it was a huge there was huge exposure. And so coming back, that was one. And the second thing was like my idea of what it means to better myself as a person is now vastly different than when it was after ayahuasca and after assemblage, and how to pursue that. And then the shutdown happened. So, you know, before we get into that, you know, why don't you tell people sort of what your experience was moving to California and any updates you had, you know, sort of after we stopped doing the podcast?
No, man, I've learned. There's not much to say, because there's two things I learned during those next level years, and just that growth is, one, surrender to the experience that is life. I don't try to control much anymore. There's only so much I can control. Most of that comes from within me, my emotions, on what happens to me outside of this. Taking action on certain things and being okay with it going either or way, whether it's successful or not. So first, it was surrendering to the experience that is called life, and taking action at the same time. So surrendering, take action, but be okay with things not working out in your favor, because life, you know, you are in life. You're not, you know, life isn't something that you can just grab handles and be like, I can control all of this. I read a lot of Stoicism, so very much learned a lot from those guys back in the day. And a lady, there was one woman philosopher, by the way, Stoic philosopher. But I think taking that into account, and the fact that I always, and this is how I envision myself. You ever watched Avatar, the anime show, and you see how they bend to the certain elements, and it's like a dance, right? So that's how I see my life. It's just a constant dance to like these different things that are happening, and I'm just adapting to it, and I'm letting it flow with me, in a sense. So moving to California was that. It was just like, I'm just flowing with life. This is something that I put into the universe, and my intention was to live in California for a little bit, and I made that happen, right? I made it happen through action, through showing up at work, because it was a promotion, for those that don't know, and just making sure that, you know, and it's funny how the universe works. The same job I applied to here in New York, I didn't get it. They found someone else who was, you know, better to a certain extent, probably just had a better degree than me. But then the position for California came up, and I just like applied to it, just like, hey, what if it happens? Or like, what if? So I had no expectation. I was like, if I don't get it, cool, just keep it moving. You know what I mean? But I ended up just going through the whole process and getting it without any expectations. I didn't try hard. I wasn't there just like, I need to make this work. It was more like, oh, like, I'm ready for this. If it happens, cool. And that's what happened. And, you know, we had to adapt to California. You know, we got a car and living that life and going to work and being stuck in traffic and doing all that. So that learning experience, it wasn't anything new. I mean, obviously meeting people was always a challenge, and building community. But, you know, I think COVID and fast forwarding to COVID, when that hit, I mean, I was excited to finally be working virtual, because that's something I've always wanted. I never wanted to go to an office. I hate working in offices. I hate being under those lights all day. Like, I want to be able to just like, oh, I'm working, I get off a meeting, I could just go outside and just like, boom, have the sun shine on me, breathe in some fresh air. I could work outside if I want on my balcony. So I was really looking forward to it, actually. And then kind of like the whole Zoom thing was something that came, you know, that was like, oh, we always had this tool, but now we're really using it. Now I can still see my family and my friends. But I still want to build this sense of community, and looking forward into the future. You're thinking, okay, there's a part of the future that we're still unsure of. We don't know what this thing may turn into, or what may happen with government, or all this crazy stuff that's happening in our world. But once again, what can you control?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I can control my actions. I can kind of create a sense of like normalcy by saying, these are the things I want to accomplish over the next few years. One of the big things we're talking about is gaining some land and really starting the process of building our own little community. So like, okay, that's a great plan, because now like I'm getting paid more. I'm really digging in again to see if I can get another promotion, as well as making money on the side. We're doing big things with this podcast. We're planning to make this even bigger. So sponsorships and making money off of the podcast, and just finding ways where we can accumulate the money or energy to be able to produce the community.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like what's been top of mind. And it's just like, I feel like I'm an egg. You know what I mean? And I'm just getting ready to hatch.
Yeah.
And we're just warming up for it.
I mean, for me, I mean, coming back once the shutdown happened, I at first, just like everyone else, that they were saying crazy things was coming with COVID, and that, we all have to be really careful. And initially, I didn't know anything about what was going on. And so I just prescribed to what the general populace prescribed to. But then, very quickly, going through my own resources and people I trust within, health and well-being and wellness, who have had a strong track record versus a lot of these institutions who have had a very, very poor record, saying things that were drastically opposed to the general consensus around wearing masks, around social distancing, around staying inside. And, all these things sound like common sense to me when I started looking at the numbers of COVID deaths and seeing that, like, oh, this isn't really as bad as we thought it was. It's terrible that people are dying, of course. But it doesn't seem that much worse off than the flu every year. And having already had an understanding of how the news works, having already had an understanding of how certain health institutions in our government work, and how many times throughout history they've fucked us, like literally just fucked us as people. And then having an understanding of like what's available to us on the other side, what's available to us if we get sunshine every day, if we connect with our loved ones, if we eat clean and healthy food. And what I started seeing was all of these, whether manufactured or real, what started happening because of COVID were all of these institutions in health, but also the state of our business, the state of our farms, the state of our agriculture, the state of our, just like the way businesses run in America and around the world, the way we communicate to each other, the exposure of social media and what it does there. Like, you start seeing all these institutions crumbling in front of you, and the way things were being done in America, at least, were really starting to crumble. And it was the first time where I felt a sense of this was the first time I ever felt like an American, like I never connected with that idea.
Me neither, yeah.
But this was the first time where I was like, it was the first time I had ever been ashamed to be an American. And it was the first time that I felt a sense of responsibility as an American. And when you started seeing, JP Sears make his video,
that went viral.
That went super viral about,
believing
everything
the media says, or something like that?
Like what it's like to believe everything the media tells you.
Hilarious.
How to believe everything the media tells you. And he came out with other ones, and then you had documentaries come out, and people and different people talking about it, and it always just made common sense to me. And it's crazy because it's like, one of the things when I realized when I was in San Diego living with roommates was like, wow, that people really don't know. Like, people, like, because my roommates were, obsessed with they all ate like shit. They were either obsessed with making money or just trying to live that 9-to-5 life. And they were eating, garbage food, not exercising, wondering why they hated their lives. And I was like, wow, like this isn't common sense. Like, because everyone I know who's my friend and the way I live my life, we all kind of live in a bubble. We all live in a bubble with the way we operate. But you see that a large majority of the rest of the world doesn't work like that.
Blast it out.
And then, even more so once COVID happened and people were fucking running for toilet paper and you know, we're going crazy at the butcher shop and masks everywhere and terrified to be next to a person. And you start realizing, like, it's right in your face that people really don't know, and people are just really willing to give up their freedom and give up their sense of critical thinking just to feel a sense of safety. And you know, I was sort of opposed to get back to the podcast again for a little while because I was still working through my own shit. But then Ruben brought it up multiple times that we could start, or we could go on Zoom, and more this bigger and bigger sense of responsibility started to come up. And what I started to realize, because I was the one who brought up, hey, I think we should change the name. I think we should sort of start changing the narrative around how we're doing this, because right now, like, you know, what's foundational is, yes, eat clean, eat organic, you know, move your body, get healthy, explore different health practices. And what I think is becoming more and more important for discussion is, how do we live our lives more holistically, and how do we live our lives moving forward out of what's happened in 2020, and how do we have uncomfortable conversations, and how do we put the pressure cooker on our guests to talk about things that are taboo or uncomfortable. Because one of the biggest things we're realizing, you know, especially after that whole stint with Joe Rogan and Spotify, when they were trying to shut down his podcast for words being, you know, said on a show, is things are fucking different. You know, things are really different in our culture today. And it is, you know, listening to Kyle Kingsbury's episode with JP, what was said was, you know, so important, which is like, right now, the safest thing to do is to have risky conversation. Right. You know, that's the safest thing to do. The safest people are the ones who are willing to talk about things that can get you canceled, or can get you banned, or that can get you doing something. And, you know, this is the only thing that we've done long enough, in our only platform where we can really connect messages out into the world. And even if it's 500 people who are listening to us, like, hey, if 1% of that or 0.1% of that changes the way they live their life, or changes the way they view these circumstances, you know, we've done a great job. And I think it's important that we continue with our voices showing up and saying, hey, there's a different way to do this. And what you may see as chaos and sadness and anger and fear isn't affecting everyone the same way. And it really feels like we're part of a few amount of people that decide to live our lives differently. And if we can share that with the world, and share that it's just Ruben and Jessie, it's just two guys, we're no one special, we just choose to live our lives a different way. And so moving forward, you know, this is just the Ruben and Jessie podcast. It's not just about health, it's about everything we do. It's about every part of us, the good, the bad, the ugly, and same thing with our guests. We're just here to talk shit and have conversation and explore all the different ideas, and we just don't want to hold ourselves to one aspect of life, which is health. So
yep, even though it's a big part still, because we care about it. But yeah, and being okay with having those uncomfortable conversations, because we tend to, as humans, we tend to be like, oh, will this person like me? Will this person? That's something that's always in the back of your mind. So it's just like, oh, because I have this belief, I'm not gonna, like, you know, for example, Cameron Haynes, you know, he had, like, you know, he was on, like, speaking for Trump's son or something, like Trump Jr. One of his posts, and I could have been just your average person that's like starts unfollowing him because he's a Trump supporter. He's really good friends with Trump's son, Trump Jr. and what all that shit. And I was just like, I'm not, because I still believe in some of his values. I still believe in a lot of the things he does. I respect his work ethic like crazy. I ain't stop. I ain't stop. I didn't unfollow him. I don't think anything different of them,
Yeah.
of Cam, because of that. I don't know who he is, but I still show immense respect for that man. And I hope that more and more people can do that. And if they listen to this right now, based on what you just said, they may be upset.
Triggered.
You know? They may be triggered. But that's just Jesse. And yes, there's other people out there like that. That's just Jesse. And I have my own thoughts there as well. But it's just like, hey, you know, you can keep listening just because one thing is different than what you believe in, right? If you're listening to this and you're like, I don't believe that, shit is on fire, 260,000 people have died from this thing, yada, 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 we're going into another lockdown, blah, 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 blah. But there's a lot of flaws in that.
Yeah.
And all that stuff. And that's what we're talking about. There's so many flaws there, and there's an agenda that we don't know about as humanity, as Americans, and there's something that's just leaning to make this other thing happen, and we don't know what that is, and it's just like, that's the scary part.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you know, this disease, whatever it is, affects everyone differently, and we need to do more research on it. Right. They're saying things like that as if they know vaccine, all this stuff, and it's just like, but it's only been around for less than a year.
Yeah.
So what's going on?
And we're just here to have conversation. You know, we want to empower our listeners to make their own
decisions,
sovereign choices. You know, and live your life the way you want to live it, and that requires critical thinking. You know, you don't have to take our approach. You can wear your mask. You can stay at home. You can stay away from people if that's what you decide to do. Yeah. We just want to encourage people to make think for themselves, and that's what we're doing here. We're here to have conversations because we want to be informed and we want to be able to think for ourselves, and you do that through communication, you do that through discussion, and that's where, you know, we're excited to continue doing here. And, you know, some of, you know, Ruben already brought it up, but one of the big projects we have going on for the next few years, and what's really going to evolve, you know, production as far as this podcast and what we're going to be putting out as Ruben and Jesse in the world, is creating our own sovereign community. You know, it's a great podcast with Joyous Hart and Kyle Kingsbury, where they talk about this, and we've been talking about this for like 2 years, like for years now, at least a year now, about, you know, oh, what would it be like to have our own land? Oh, what would it be like to just, you know, have our own, you know, little place in the world, and have our own home, build our own homes, and have, you know, our own food and shelter, and just right there available for us, and be connected to nature. We've been talking about this and talking about it, but then listening to the podcast and hearing how, you know, right now with everything going on in the world, it's one of the most important decisions you can make is figure out how you can live sovereignly, how you can have your own community, your own resources to food and water and shelter, and live life the way you want to live it. And, you know, not wait for anyone else or anything else to do that for you. And yet we still want to be connected. We still want to participate. We don't want to be off the grid. We want to be in the world, but not of the world. You know, we want to have our own place where we can live life the way we live. And even with all the drawbacks of the internet and social media, the beautiful thing is that we can live our lives and still put out the message and share our experience and the way we live our lives out into the world. And so that's, you know, as we start to move towards this next version of our lives, we will definitely, you know, our level of production and what we're putting out in the world, especially once we're, you know, back and we can do this more often in life. It's, you know, our content is going to grow exponentially, and we're going to learn so many things over the next 2 years as we try to move towards this new way of living, that we'll be able to share with you and show you how we do this. And there's just so much. I'm so excited for everything that's about to come in the next few years for us, for the world. We are experiencing a purge. And on the other side of this, we have the potential to really create something beautiful as a species. So we just want to be we just want to be on the good side of that. So, yeah, so I mean, is there anything else you wanna say before we wrap?
Nah, man, just, continue to support us. Things are moving, but that's the reality of life. Change is the only constant. I forgot who said that, but it's the only constant, and that's what we're moving into next. And we're still going to be pushing out content. We're still going to be having our guests. We're still going to be doing this. Spartan journals are still going to continue. We ran an 8 mile together yesterday.
That's right. Yeah, we did.
But we'll still be pushing that out. So please, please, please share this. Like, there's people out there that I think can use listening to two folks and really start thinking, and we can help with that, bringing those people in, those guests, and our conversations about, like, hey, let's think of it this way. What if you did this? What if, versus just following whatever is the agenda of these huge organizations. Because now is that time where humanity gets to, go from a caterpillar to a butterfly, but that's really up to you. It's not up to, and that's really up to you. If you continue following the media and all these like organizations, Facebook and all that, you're just gonna stay as a caterpillar. So it's that time, it's that moment.
It's the tipping point.
It's the tipping point. Or 2020, it's like vision, clear, we're seeing everything. So when you think of it like that, you're like, it's my responsibility to create the life that I want. And I'll have to, follow the traditional American way, in a sense. If you're from America, for instance, and be like, I need to have 2 kids and a house and white picket fence and a dog. And no, what if you want to create something like we do, like with a community, and like build a community together? And that's our path. Maybe it's not yours, but it's just looking at things different.
Yeah.
Not taking what has been fed to us all these years. Now it's being like, wait, that didn't work. We tried, it was a great experiment, and we're seeing the repercussions of doing that, of living that life. Yeah. So I just love those kinds of conversations. I can't wait to have more.
Yes, brother. So with that, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in. It's been an incredible journey. It's been 4 years since I known this fool. You know what I'm saying? So we're just going to keep doing. We're going to keep growing, evolving, and you'll be here along with us for the ride. Keep listening, keep sharing. If you got questions, hit us up. And we're always here to chat, to listen, to discuss, to do some mushrooms every now and then. So otherwise, thank you for listening. And we're going to go on with our day. And we hope you enjoy yours. Peace.
Peace.